welcome to BigTent USA again. Tonight we're excited to hear from Seth Flaxman, who's the co-founder and CEO of Democracy Works. What does Democracy Works do? They do a lot. Democracy Works powers the internet voting space. They partner with major tech platforms, corporations, nonprofits, and universities, and they provide all the voting information their users need through their Turbo Vote technology. So when you Google, how do I vote, and get an answer, that's Democracy Works. Voting is in the news. Ensuring access to voting has never been more important, and Democracy Works makes sure we have all the information we need to get our vote counted. Seth has been a voting geek, and I say that with great admiration, since high school. His education and job experience led directly to the idea for Democracy Works. He's going to tell us the Democracy Works story and how they're revolutionizing the voting information space. Please put your questions in the chat box and Seth will answer as many as he can. Welcome, Seth.
Great, thank you, Sue. Hi, everybody. Nice to see everyone. I love my Bruce intro. I feel like I'm on the convention stage right now. I'm gonna share, what we do and how it all started, but I'm hoping that we can mostly spend time in Q&A because there's so much happening right now, to use the euphemism, that I feel like that's what folks probably most have on their mind, is get a sense of like what's the state of play. Just to start out with the role I see for ourselves this year. I think first of all, everybody has a role to play in this election cycle to save our democracy. I know everyone here has been organizing, and talking to Sue and Susan, it sounds like you all been doing a lot, so thank you for all of your organizing. Our role at Democracy Works, our probably biggest role is providing information at scale to tens of millions of voters this year about how to vote. And every different part of it, registration, mail, in person. So that's a moving target, that's hard, but also we're supporting the infrastructure of elections by supporting states and localities, election administrators, to make sure they can handle all of the changes that are happening too. So I'll talk about both of those things. But I started Democracy Works over a decade ago. That was when I had my personal freak out moment about our democracy. Something I think a lot of people have had at some point or another. And those are much simpler times to have your freak out moment about democracy. But it was combined with this personal experience I then had of realizing I was in grad school at the time. I'd gone to the Kennedy School to get a degree in public policy. I was really interested in why the internet was not revolutionizing the public sector. And so I've had that hat on while I was there, and had this experience of missing 3 different elections, each for a different reason while I was in grad school. And that became the origin of Democracy Works, because I looked into each reason why I was missing an election. And it was like, one, I had missed the deadline to get in my vote by mail application back home where I was living. I missed another trying to re-register, and then my third one, which was my final straw, was going down some random street and seeing a sandwich board telling me that today was election day. And I was like, this is it? This is how you find out how to vote in America? You have to go down the right street on the right day and see the sandwich board in time. And so I started researching how many people this affected, and sort of became obsessed with the question of how technology could revolutionize the voter experience and increase our participation through that as a way to improve our democracy, because the numbers were really big in terms of who you could impact. Everyone here probably is very well aware of our turnout problem, the participation problem in the US, where it's 60% max in presidentials, average historically 40% in midterms, and 5 to 10% in local and primary elections. But what a lot of folks, including myself, didn't know is that the census asks people every 2 years why they don't vote. And the process reasons, there's 12 of them that people cite. Missed deadlines, didn't know, weather, no transportation. And if you add up all of those things, it's the majority of the reason people aren't voting. over 60% in some elections. And so for me, I identified with it because I was obsessed with voting. Like in high school, I was like driving my friends to vote in school board budget elections during my lunch breaks because I was a voting geek, as Sue said. And like I came from a political family, like not like run for office political, but my dad would go to school board meetings and after work and yell at them every week. And we would talk about it over dinner. So like it was a political family. I was super engaged. And then here I was missing all these elections, each for a process reason. And it turned out a majority of non-voters shared my experience. And so that for me was the moment I sort of became obsessed with this question. I was freaked out about our democracy. Here was this lever I could pull. I can make it easier with technology and it could impact things at scale nationwide. So that was the impetus for all of this work. And this year, the process issues have just gotten from bad to a perfect storm, where we have not just regular confusion, but confusion related to misinformation, confusion related to quickly changing rules, deadlines, polling places that are just a response to COVID. Even that well-intentioned, I guess is what I'm saying, changes that cause confusion. Registration has fallen off a cliff this year because of DMV closures for 6 months. And there's this logistics race across the country for states to build out the capacity of mail voting, to find new polling places. So we are in a perfect storm of this problem that I was trying to solve a decade ago, where like can technology be this solution to process challenges to voting? And what is making us feel confident, what makes me feel like we got this right now is our experience from the midterms. We were battle tested in 2018 with everything that we did. And I'll explain the how, but just to understand where my confidence comes from. We registered around 2 million voters online in 2018. We signed up around 7 million for our notifications, helping them vote in all of their elections. And then for me, the most important thing at scale is we helped tens of millions find their polling places online in 2018. And started this process of tracking hundreds of thousands of vote-by-mail ballots, which at the time no one else thought was important. So I'll talk about that work for this year more as well. So we were battle tested in 2018, doing all of our work at incredible scale, and the result was really historic. I mean, everyone was involved in 2018. It's hard to isolate who did what, but the turnout was 14 points higher in the midterms than it was in the previous midterm. 14 points is a huge historic jump. And we were behind the scenes powering a lot of it. Almost anything you saw online, we were touching with our data or technology. And so when COVID hit in March, we were already gearing up to do everything we could to increase turnout this year, but then we also took everything we built and we were like, how do we put this into saving the election? We're a team of around 70, around 2/3 technical, data, developers, products, folks. And there were a bunch of different ways we knew we could directly confront the challenge of this election. First was, we run something called the Voting Information Project. So through that, we partner with the states and provide all the polling place data you see online to Google. So if you've ever Googled online, where do I vote? Just like in regular Google Maps, that data comes from us. And we get it directly from the states with tools we built that interface with their systems. And we knew the first thing that was going to happen this year is polling places were going to change dramatically on election day, as certain ones were offline because they weren't safe. And we also know that with suppression, one of the key tools is to move polling places at the last minute to cause confusion. And so the countermeasure for us on both of these fronts were we need to do everything we can to keep polling place data up to date online in the run up to election day. The second was drop boxes were going to become a lot more important, ballot drop boxes, which until this year, nobody cared about ballot drop boxes. That was like the biggest voting geek, like wanting to talk to people about this. The second is we got the state to include all that data in their feeds. People are going to need to be able to Google in the run up to election day, where is my ballot drop box, and see it in Google Maps. And so similarly, if there are changes to those getting moved at last minute, something no one would have foreseen before this cycle, but now mailboxes can get moved. Who knows what will happen to ballot drop boxes? People need to be able to find them. So making sure those would be online. The third was this huge effort to build up mail voting capacity as quickly as possible in the states. That really like started in March and April. And so we started advising with state election directors on how to start doing mail tracking, attaching barcodes to all of their pieces of mail. And then if they had the capacity to also use our tool, Ballot Scout, which was built so that voters and election administrators could track each ballot through the mail, know where it is, get text message reminders. Probably last and most important is through TurboVote, where we text and email voters directly what they need to know in order to vote in all of their elections. We turned it into this rapid response tool where sort of no matter what happens, we could get voters the information they needed in order to vote this year, which is like changed over the course of the year. Even like in Wisconsin, that meant like having multiple different messages on like how to vote depending on how a court case ended up that morning, with like different information for voters about what they would need to do. To like DC, like telling people how to vote during a curfew during their primary. This was making like a long year, not to like take you through a journey of it. And but in some ways it was all practice for the next 75 days, where we are making sure that anyone who signed up for TurboVote gets the information they need to be able to vote no matter what happens this cycle. And that includes getting folks to vote as early as possible when they're applying to vote by mail, but also, checking their registration, figuring out where to vote on election day. And our role as the emergency sort of crisis around elections has expanded, our role has continued to evolve to the point where now one of the things we did not expect to be doing this cycle, but are now leaning into, is helping solve the poll worker shortage crisis, where one of the reasons why you had that massive collapse in the number of polling places in Wisconsin during their primary was because up to 70–80% of poll workers didn't show up on election day. And so we built out a model with MIT predicting that around 460,000 poll workers may not show up this year. That's the number that we need to recruit. And so we are working with our corporate coalition called the Civic Alliance that we co-founded with CAA to recruit 250,000 poll workers, and mobilizing parts of our TurboVote list, which is, we work with around 160 colleges around the country, and a bunch of nonprofits as well. So it's been a wild year, but I'm feeling optimistic about our role in all of this. Despite everything that's happening, I'm still expecting massive turnout. I'm not seeing people dissuaded from participating in the election. On the postal system disruption, I'm seeing attempts to disrupt it, but I'm from my contacts in election administration land, I'm not seeing big delays in election mail right now, so I don't know how successful it will be. And on poll worker recruitment, I'm feeling like we're gonna get there, and we're gonna be able to keep as many polls open as possible. So there's a lot going on, but I'm gonna try to be a dose of hope for everyone on all of this. That might be a good stopping place, because I feel like I dropped a lot of information about what's going on with the election, our role in it, trying to deliver information at scale and support the election administration infrastructure. So with that, I would love to get questions in the, I think we're doing it in the chat, Sue. Great question. We participate in this coalition. Actually, someone on my team can drop the link, Power the Polls, in the chat. Power the Polls is a coalition that is going to help connect people to poll workers. The other way to do it is to just Google for your local election administrator and connect directly to them. So there's the easy single link, and then also if you want to do a little bit more time, you can get in touch with your state, with your local election official. If a voter has an option, is it better to vote early? One of the things that makes this space so complicated is that like every state is different. So the question is like, what should we advise a voter to do? Should it be vote early? Should it be by mail? Like, what's the better option? Like, the option's going to change depending on what state you're in. And so in the states where, for example, there's now, I think, 6 states where everyone's going to get mailed a ballot automatically. And then you can either mail that ballot back, or you can vote at for some of them, you can also vote at a polling place. I think you should drop off your mail-in ballot at a drop box. That's like the easiest thing to do, and that means you're not putting any capacity constraints on the polling places. So for me, that's my preferred top option. I think in general, my advice is either vote as early as possible or mail your ballot in as early as possible. But I don't have a strong preference between the two. All right, I'm gonna scroll up. Okay, next, Rachel's question. Are you working with College Compact, which is a coalition of approximately 1,000 colleges that works to recruit poll workers among college students? Yeah, we're a part of something called the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition that Campus Compact is also a part of. That's the main organizing coalition in the higher ed space right now that we work through, and they're a great organization. What about lack of enough ballots being printed by secretaries of state? Is it under control? Do you track that? Yes, I don't see Mary's square, but that is one of the things that I have been worried about. I think I'm not tracking that. I'm having trouble tracking that. And it's something that I wish journalists would actually pay a little bit more attention to. That's ballot printing is one of the flags we gave to states in April. Like, find your ballot printer by July, put in the order for the number of ballots that you need. Otherwise, they're going to be scrambling at the last minute for ballots from different vendors. And I think the ballot printing issue is bigger for mail-in ballots than for in-person ballots. That's what's causing the surge in need for printing, because it's so unexpected in so many states. They don't know how to, a lot of states are just totally unused to this level of mail-in voting. For me, making sure there are enough poll workers working the polls that, like, in a worst case scenario, people can vote in person, that's the pressure release valve for any challenges with mail-in voting. So that's the thing that's making me not entirely worry about that one. Great, and love that BigTent is a partner with Power the Polls. And Kelly, do you have to live in the state where you want to be a poll worker? I have checked into Pennsylvania and my home state, Wisconsin. It seems you have to be a resident. I actually don't know this one off the top of my head. It's like most things in elections, it's probably different by state. And almost always, I believe you need to be a resident. I think that's like the status quo. I don't know if there's any exceptions to that. There might be a few exceptions to that, but I'm not sure what they would be. One of the things that is cool about this is in a lot of states, you can be as young as 13 and be a poll worker. So this is actually something you could do even if you can't register yet because you're too young. I'm thinking that maybe that's like, I don't want to make up the state. I know one state you can go as young as 13, but a few are younger than 18. You can be a poll worker. Do I trust the recent turnaround by Postmaster General? How much did he take down before he was stopped? This was an interesting thing. I tried to get a sense from election directors. So in every state, you have your Secretary of State, and then in the vast majority of states, you have your Secretary of State, and then you have the election director who reports to them. The election director is like the professional who runs the election, and the secretary is the more political person. Our contacts are primarily with the election directors. They're the ones we work with most closely, and they were not seeing decreases in reliability for election mail as of late last week, which I thought was, for me, really notable because it was so out of line with everything that we were reading and seeing. I, at this point, don't like trust but verify, I guess. Like, I think, you know, I'm paying attention to whether the rate of election mail changes. So like, I think if that happens, secretaries and election directors will start ringing alarm bells. That for me is the real signal to watch, whether there are challenges with the postal service. But I'm still worried about this. I think the pressure has worked really well, and I'm hoping he testifies and we all get a little bit more information about this. Nancy asked, how do you deal with regions where the voter suppression is extreme, where the requirements to vote are nearly impossible for so many? This is tough. So for me, I take like an ecosystem perspective for all the nonprofits who are doing work to protect voting this year. There is a coalition, you know, it's more focused on suing states and bringing them to court, which I think is a key solution for a lot of extreme voter suppression tactics. Sometimes those don't work in time for the election. For me, I see our role is like technology as a countermeasure. So if you make something harder, what can you do to quickly educate someone about the step that they need to overcome in order to vote? If they move the polling place, how do you make sure they quickly find it online? How can you ultimately decrease the effectiveness of different voter suppression tactics over time by improving the information that's available for different voters? Because a lot of times voter suppression tactics are misinformation or disinformation, where you're just telling people the wrong information, or you're changing something basic and making it hard to get the right information. That's where we have focused, but I would love to go deeper into like which types of voter suppression, if that's of interest to folks, because I think each one probably has a different solution. Carmina, can you educate us a little more about ballot boxes? They still require the USPS to deliver a ballot. What do you know about rejection rates and litigation that is going on in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin? Seems like it would be a great alternative to standing in line. So ballot drop boxes are great. And actually, if someone on my team could drop the little blog post we just did on ballot drop boxes too, if folks want more information. The ballot drop box is run by the election office. So it's a way for you to put, basically give your ballot directly to the election official. without the postal system being involved. And a lot of states that have these have very specific regulations about them being bolted to the ground or watched by a surveillance camera or being staffed, how frequently they need to have the ballots brought to the election office. So I think it's a great, great alternative to standing in line. Ballot drop boxes are really key in a state like Colorado, where everyone gets a ballot in the mail. Over 70% of the ballots are returned through ballot drop boxes. In terms of the rejection rates, this is one of the biggest challenges for vote by mail, is that there are just different procedural steps you need to educate people about. One of them is signing the ballot. You need to like sign the envelope, and if the signature doesn't match your registration signature on file, that ballot can be rejected, or if you forgot to sign it at all. And so the states that have moved most successfully to mail voting over time, you know, they have time to educate their voters on how to do this. And so one of the things we're trying to educate folks on scale about is like, do all of these steps. Like, don't forget to sign your ballot. Make sure your signature matches your regular signature. Because I do think that's going to be one of the main ways ballots are contested or challenged this cycle. And Anne asks, how do you get specific on-the-ground information? And I'm not sure if you're here, I'd actually love a little bit more context for your question. I'm gonna skip it for now, but we'll come back to it. Because it could either mean like, how do we get the data on where the polling places are, or it could either mean like, how do we tell people specifically where to vote. Gail writes, there's a lot of confusion about the difference between absentee voting and vote by mail. Is there a difference? It's a policy difference in that vote by mail in the election administration community means you mail everybody a ballot who's registered to vote or is an active voter. And absentee is you allow people to request a ballot in the mail. The model that is like most effective for voters is vote by mail, where everybody gets a ballot automatically. In Colorado, they've become like the national model for this, where they have automatic voter registration, which is important because then they mail all registered voters a ballot. And then you can either mail your ballot back, or you can go to any polling place on election day if you would prefer not to. So the Colorado model led to over time, like over 8-point increase in turnout in the state, where it was like, I don't know, 17th or something in turnout to now like 2nd in turnout. So it's very effective, and it's for something for years that we've been talking about, like building technology and helping states move to this model of voting. Absentee, there's also variations depending on whether it's excuse or no excuse. This cycle, a lot of states moved away from excuses or added COVID as an excuse. But the majority of states that let you vote absentee, you don't need an excuse. You just need to apply. And so some of the things we've been sort of talking to states about are like making sure you can apply online to get your absentee ballot, as opposed to needing to send in a physical form. Like there are ways even you can make that process more seamless. And Avery asked, do you have a sense of how best to coordinate COVID-safe voting for those that will, for some reason, have to vote in person? Is there a larger entity coordinating COVID-safe drop-offs, et cetera? Do you recommend volunteering with an organization to help get voters to the physical polling places safely? We've been working with a Healthy Voting Coalition. That's another link we could find and drop. Some of my team maybe also dropped the op-ed we wrote about poll workers. But this is one of the reasons I'm calling for all polling places to remain open in like March and when COVID first started, people were like, okay, well, we'll close down some of these polling places. We're going to move to vote by mail. And it's a horrible idea. Keeping every polling place open is the only way to ensure there isn't crowding at polling places. What used to fit in a church basement now needs a high school gym because all of the booths are like at least 6 feet apart from each other, whereas it used to all be pushed in together. So you can fit a lot fewer voting booths in a polling place that you used to. And a lot of these buildings aren't big open space buildings. So in general, trying to keep open as many polling places as possible is one of the ways you have safe voting in person to avoid crowding. And the rest is just everything else we've learned. Making sure there's, if you're working the polls, everyone has PPE, has a mask, has gloves, has hand sanitizer. Actually, this is one of the more inspiring stories of this cycle. Anheuser-Busch has worked with the secretaries, election directors to distribute hand sanitizer because distillers have that power to also make hand sanitizer. So like a third of the hand sanitizer that election poll workers needed for election day is being donated directly. And in terms of volunteering, I haven't heard of a great organization that's doing this nationwide. But if you follow up with us via Sue, we can maybe try to find something that's more local to your state if that's something you want to do. Sue asks, if you vote by mail and get your ballot early, when will it get counted? This is different in every state, which is one of the challenges for maintaining the legitimacy of the election this year. I am worried about misinformation where folks say, oh, it's taking so long, it's because they're finding new ballots or they're, or whatever it is. But like in a state like New York, where I'm from, you're actually legally not even allowed to start counting it for a week. It's probably one of the worst states on this front. A lot of other states, you count them as soon as they come in. And the states that have historically had more mail voting do this better because they've been building up systems for it over time. But the delay in counting these ballots is going to be the reason why we won't have a traditional election night this year. We want to sort of ban the notion of the traditional election night. We're going to be kicking off a counting process and are working to try to normalize all that education so folks don't doubt the legitimacy of the election because there won't be a winner on election night. And Kelly asks, where are we in terms of purge voters? How do we reach them? So this is folks who are cleaned off of lists, of voter registration lists. This is a real challenge because it's actually federal law that states are supposed to clean their lists in between cycles, and some do it very carefully and others don't do it carefully. So it's hard to tell how this power is abused in real time. And also this is something I am worried about. It's one of the reasons why I push for same-day voter registration, because when you have same-day voter registration, this disappears as a voter suppression tactic, because worst case, you just show up and you register and it's like not a problem. In terms of how we reach these voters, I think in all the normal places, honestly. I mean, this is like for us, we, on TurboVote, for example, we make sure registration prompts are on the front page of Facebook and Instagram, Snapchat, our college partners, and we find that putting registration in front of people online in a mass way is a way to reach everyone. including folks who were potentially purged. And it's why we ask everyone to check their registration as a part of our process. And Mary asked, do you partner with any orgs that target older voters who aren't necessarily tech savvy? Yeah, actually, so TurboVote, we think of it as like a clipboard, a new clipboard that, and then, you know, our partners sign up voters for it. And then once they're signed up for TurboVote, we help them register. And then we just like help them with anything they would need in order to vote through text messages and email with the information they would need. So almost all of our work happens through partnerships. And one of those partners is AARP, which uses the TurboVote platform as part of their attempt to reach older voters who aren't necessarily tech savvy, and they find that just like text messages with the right information isn't effective. If the state is, thank you everyone for all these questions, by the way. I've done these before, and it's like sometimes hard to get all these great questions. So this is a lot of fun for me. If the state is not helping towns in Connecticut with mailing out general election ballots, is there something we can do to ensure timely receipt of absentee ballots in voters' hands? So Connecticut is one of, I think, like 8 states where the towns are responsible for voting. And that does introduce a lot of election administration challenges because towns don't have resources to do a lot of this. And the states also aren't given a lot of power to even help or control things. I don't have a great answer. I mean, I would suggest people sign up for TurboVote because we will help them navigate all of the different timelines that you need for getting your absentee ballot. That's why we built the tool to help you navigate things no matter what the state is doing. But I don't know of any effort in the state in particular of an org working on that. Oh, great. So this is Kelly brought the question. There are 17 million purge voters. How do we reach them? How do you access lists of purge voters? So actually, I can add a little bit more on this. The one nonprofit that we partner with is called ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Exchange, and they help identify lists of purged voters and like mail all of them registration forms, but they have to partner with the state to do it, which is hard, right? Because that means that the states that are doing this well are the ones taking care of it, and the ones that aren't don't care about this. But I don't have much more to add than that, which is we're trying to reach them the way we reach all unregistered voters, which is tricky. And Mary asked you, do you have a Spanish language option, all of your messaging? Yeah, so TurboVote, all of TurboVote is both in English and in Spanish. We also, that includes a help desk. So we staff like 100-person on election day help desk. So anyone who texts us back with a different question, we can get them an answer to their specific problem, both in English and in Spanish. And you wouldn't imagine the sort of problems that we're helping people with. This is actually pre-COVID, helping people vote from the hospital, texting back, asking how to get their ballot to them there, or folks who are formerly incarcerated asking different, very state-specific questions, texting us back. So anyway, yeah, Spanish and everything, including some of the hard stuff like help desk. For the voting information project, this is how everyone Googles, where do I get my polling place? We have another tool, Get to the Polls, which is the same language. You'll probably see that on Facebook on election day. And because there are fewer words on that site, we can actually do that in 14 languages. That's pretty exciting that we can offer it to so many different language communities. Susan writes, how many of the removed boxes were duplicates? I see that a lot or very lightly used, but other boxes are available. There's a lot of noise on both sides of that issue. Clearly, the USPS needs reform, but they should wait until after the election since Trump has made it into a big issue. Yeah, I guess what I was saying before. I've been having a hard time figuring out what's actually going on with the Postal Service, and I'm just watching, is election mail delayed, and like trying to track that as best we can to get a sense of the real issue. But in terms of removing boxes, even duplicates or ones that are lightly used, it's just like changing anything before an election is going to hurt some voter who's just not used to having to do something differently. It's like changing a polling place at the last minute. Like, it still exists. It might be still 2 blocks away, but you might not know where it is. And even that can like be a challenge for someone. So I'm very pro, like, don't change anything. No post box moves, no polling place moves if you can avoid it. Like that, keep things where they are and help people find them. Susan asked, do you think that how we vote by mail or in person is becoming a Republican Democratic issue, so that if the winner is not clear on November 3rd, Trump will call it a rigged election? So do we need to show up in person? There's a lot in here. What's interesting is at the state level, you do see a lot of Republican secretaries of state who are defending their mail voting procedures. I don't know if that matters in terms of the bigger media narrative that's happening right now, but I do think that's notable, that there's a fracture on this. And you also see a lot of Republican campaign leaders, the people who actually do the running of campaigns, who are also very pro mail voting because they worry that their voters are being turned off from it. So I'm not seeing that there's like a unified political messaging strategy on any of this, I guess is what I'm saying. I do think the best case scenario for the legitimacy of the election is it is clear both with in-person votes and mail-in votes who the winner is. I do worry about it being called rigged if the winner on election night is different from the winner after you count mail-in ballots. But everything's so different in every state. I don't think there's a good strategizing solution for this. I think as long as people vote however they can, that's the best we can do. And Carmina asks, with regard to mail-in voting and early voting, when those initial early results get announced, would that be an election day? Is there something comparable to exit polls that might influence later voters? I don't think early results will be announced or should be announced. I'm worried about the media on election night saying like needing to run with something and trying to come up with any sorts of numbers to just like get ratings that night. And I'm not worried about that influencing later voters. I'm just worried about that confusing people about what's going on with the election. And so like in terms of like something I think everyone here can do, especially if you have media contacts, or folks who are in the press or in journalism in general, is to get them to write about the election very carefully on election night and talk to them about this, because we don't want to see election night. There shouldn't be an election night this year. We shouldn't have big watch parties where we're seeing what state goes which way, because I just don't think that's not going to exist, and then people are going to think the election was rigged when that doesn't happen. And Susan asks, is there an issue with stamps that must be placed when sending back the ballot, that a ballot can cost more than a regular letter? Yeah, this is an evolving thing, how much the return envelope needs to be stamped. it is practice in every single state that the USPS will deliver it no matter what and then charge the election official for the unstamped envelope. But I don't think we should rely on anything being practiced right now. I personally think this is outrageous. I don't think anything around elections should cost money, including stamps. But it is an issue, and I don't know where this ended up actually, in terms of whether they're gonna. This might still being fought. How do we get updates and last minute changes? For instance, polling place closes because of mechanical problems or they lose electricity. Great question, Ann. This is a setup for me. You should sign up for Turbo Vote. If there's a problem on election day, we're gonna, like, where your polling place moved the last minute. We did this with like the tornadoes earlier this year in Nashville, where we texted all of our users in Nashville about where they should vote because of the tornadoes. So if there's like some challenge, that's what we're building out our team to do in terms of rapid response this year.
Seth, I think the question was more, how do you get the
Oh,
most updated information so that we know that you have everything that anybody could possibly need to know?
Got it, got it. So we have staff who are housed in different war rooms with election directors and journalists on election day. So we're just embedded in the spaces where any of these things are getting talked about. But like usually even someone in that room, an election director, they're finding out because their county or town clerk called them. And like the county or town clerk is either seeing it directly or they're seeing it on Twitter themselves. The other source of information is the 866-OUR-VOTE hotline from Lawyers Committee, which is a very important resource. And so they will sometimes find problems. Most of the time that hotline is mostly they're looking people up on our polling place finder because their polling place has moved. That's the #1 call that comes into the hotline. Is just like, I can't find my polling place, someone's moved my polling place. But it also might source other intel that would come up to us, and then we would send out a text to people. In Connecticut, you can vote by mail and in person. The in-person vote will be matched to the mailed vote, and we'll cancel the mailed vote, allowing people to change their mind up to the day of the election. Who knew? I didn't know that. Every state is different. What's our budget? How much do you have left to raise to get to November? What work do you anticipate post-election? I obviously love questions like this. Thank you. So we have a $16 million budget, and we are very close to meeting it. We still have a $600,000 gap for the year. And but the sort of bets we placed on like how we are going to spend it, almost all of that we placed in like April in terms of like what was our head count going to be, what are we going to need to go into the field with, and now we're sort of raising up to that need. And then after we hit that, we have a few different projects we can sort of deploy on top of it. That's the 2 November. And then post-election, there is a lot. And just to like speak broadly about it, I see this as a turning point in mail voting this year, where I think the future of voting is going to be more people actually voting by mail, but also demanding to vote very reliably. They want to get text messages that their ballot was received, where it is, that it's on the way. If there's a problem, they want to get a text and an email or a call about it and be able to resolve it. Similar to sort of everything that happened after the 2000 election, where there was this huge national effort to put money into elections, I think the next big effort is going to build this sort of seamless, reliable mail voting system nationwide. And so I'm planning for that being a big part of our work post-election. I mentioned briefly Ballot Scout being one of the pieces of technology we build. And right now we're just in a few states, Virginia, Michigan, South Carolina, Florida, That allows a voter to track their ballot through the mail, get text messages, and then text with the election office if there's an issue. I'm planning to scale that up as much as possible. I mean, we've been trying to scale it up as much as possible before the election, but even after the election, I think that needs to go to just like standard part of our structure of voting. And then, beyond that, one of the ways we built Turbo Vote is to help you vote not just in federal elections. Like for me, it was built on my personal experience of missing all these other elections, these local elections, primary elections. And so we see this year as an opportunity to actually build the number of folks who we are in touch with. And then next year, we're going to help them vote in like tons of elections, lots of local elections every single year. There's an election every Tuesday in America, even in an off year somewhere in the country. There's so many elections that people miss. And so we're going to be continuing to hone the technology we're building to make sure people vote in local elections in 2021. And I think some of the other work is going to have to depend on what happens this election cycle. Whether we're in a more, what we're going to have to do to defend democracy next year is still a little bit up in the air. So the rest of that we're gonna be figuring out post-election as we figure out how to defend the legitimacy of the outcome potentially, just by getting out good information to voters about what's going on with the results, because I think misinformation is going to be the big weapon to confront after November 3rd. Tracy asks, what are the current estimates for the percentage and number of voters who will vote by mail? And what is that increase over 2016? In 2016, you had around 21% of the nation voting by mail. But in a lot of, I don't have this number off the top of my head right now, but like in at least 10 states, it was like over 70% were voting by mail. It's really different by state. And so I think you're going to see some states go, you can expect maybe like a 20-point jump in all states. That's sort of like one way to think about it, where like states that were at 50 might go to 80, 90% voting by mail. States that were at 4% might go to 25, 50% voting by mail. And it's that latter group of states I'm most worried about, because they haven't built all the systems and processes over time, and where we might see issues. My reverse take on that question is just like, we're going to see a lot of people voting in person. Despite all the energy on mail voting this year, a lot of people voting in person on election day still. Looking ahead, are you involved in early voting and ranked choice voting advocacy? First off, I'm a huge fan of ranked choice voting. Love it. And for those who don't know what it is, it means basically having a single primary where you list out from like 1 to 10 who your favorite options are, and the sort of top 2 from that being in the election. That's one way to do it. And early voting is self-explanatory. Our role in the ecosystem, there are a lot of advocacy organizations. We often talk about what are the best practices for running elections from a voter engagement perspective, and we are not sort of running campaigns to change state laws, but trying to change norms around what is considered best practice among voting. So we'll talk about both of those things, and like help move states towards it, but are more partnered with the folks who are running the campaigns. And if anyone wants to get connected to, if you or anyone wants to get connected to some of those works, I'm happy to connect on that after too. Belinda asks, what's the best way to pressure change at the state level? Through senators, legislatures, secretary of state. At the state level, I think it's the legislature, the state legislature, and I'll tell one really, though, impactful election reform story that I loved. In 2017, Florida passed online voter registration through their legislature, through an entirely Republican-controlled assembly, Senate, and with veto-proof majorities, even though the Secretary of State was opposed, because all the county clerks had organized. All the county clerks had said, we need this to run elections well. It costs us 10 cents to the dollar per registration. It's so much more secure. And so I love, what I love seeing is alliances between activists and local election officials, because there's a lot of power in that coalition when it gets built. Do all unstaffed ballot drop boxes have to have surveillance cameras? Who monitors that activity? The individual counties? Are there security concerns this year about drop box removal? I think it's different by state, how each one handles it. I am not concerned about drop box removal. I have not heard any concerns about that at all. There's even fun anecdotal stories about these drop boxes, like standing up to like SUVs driving into them by accident. Like, these are pretty solid pieces of infrastructure. It might actually be the safest way to vote, is dropping it off in the drop box. The Aspen Institute estimates that 30 million people have been or will be evicted due to the COVID crisis. What is being done to register these folks and ensure that the vote? This is like a crisis, actually. This is, I don't know anyone who is organizing on this very effectively. We are just trying to get information about registration in front of people wherever they are. Often people end up at other family or friends' homes for an extended period of time, or hotels, and trying to make sure folks know their rights to register at those residences. I don't think enough is being done at all for people who are evicted because of COVID. But I will call out one of our partners who I do think is doing great work. Vote ER is setting up voter registration with TurboVote at hospitals, and is seeing a huge surge in registration this year, and essentially trying to turn public health institutions into voter engagement operations. Susan asks, do some states have the return envelope identified with the name and the party registration of the voter? Not that I have heard, I don't think so. The way it usually works is you have these two envelopes. You have your like ballot envelope, which will have, which you fill out, and then there's like a return envelope that it goes inside, like a privacy envelope that it goes inside. It is built to make sure that the person opening the outer envelope doesn't know anything about the person who voted. What cable station will you be watching the returns on? I'm a millennial, I cut my cable cord. I might be like streaming different YouTube channels live from my phone onto my TV. I don't know. I have not even thought at all about election night and what I'm going to be doing. I'll let you know when I figure it out. Some more info in Connecticut. Voters who return their absentee ballot prior to election day will not be allowed to vote in a polling place. Voters who return their absentee ballot prior to election day in Connecticut will not be allowed to vote in a polling place on election day. Okay, so that is good information, Jen, to something someone posted earlier. It is a good example of, with so much changing this year, like tackling confusion about these issues is like a real challenge to stay focused on. And Tracy asked, are there any foreign countries who have experience with mail-in voting we can look to for experience and successful practices to model? I'm not sure, actually, if there's another foreign country I'd point to. I was saying before, Colorado is my model. We don't have to look internationally. Colorado does this fantastically. I think if the nation adopted that model, we'd see much higher rates of voting and much higher rates of just like happiness and reliability with the system and trust in it. Gail writes, there appears to be concern among some people about voter fraud and voting by mail despite the evidence and therefore be unwilling to accept the results. What are your thoughts on this? This might be, this is the big challenge facing our democracy, honestly, is like we are facing a legitimacy crisis. If people don't believe the results on election day, it'll get battled in the courts and needs to get battled with accurate information. I think there are going to be some folks who don't accept the results no matter what we do. I think for that reason, this is why like this is not a like last hurrah battle for this work. Like this is like an important battle for this work, but I think the next decade is going to be about rebuilding trust in our voting systems. And it goes back to what I was saying before about like, I think it is critical that by 2024, every mail-in ballot is tracked, that everyone gets text messages about where their ballot is. Like some of those sort of like geeky features or whatever, I think are actually going to be very important to rebuilding trust in our system. And so that folks can see it for themselves. So I don't think there's a great short-term solution for this. Does anyone have a happy question I can end on?
Okay, Seth, I just want to say thank you so much. This isn't a happy question, but it's a happy thank you. This was, I think, both sobering and incredibly informative. If you get us tomorrow a little note with all of the links you put up here, the links that are the organizations you partnership that people want to know about, and also, of course, a link so that everybody can support your good work. We will get it out to our whole group tomorrow. And thank you so much to you and your team for pulling this together and for giving us all this great information.
My pleasure, and thank all of you. Like, I'll end on my one quick story, which is like when I started this work in 2010, 2009, and I like had my freak out moment about democracy. This was a very lonely space. People were not all like mobilized in the way that this group is. So I just really appreciate everyone being mobilized and organized about our democracy because it's really important. So I appreciate it. And we'll